This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, our podcast and YouTube channel, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. If you go to YouTube, just put in Spirit Matters Talk and we'll pop up so you can now see us. I want to thank everybody out there that's contributed to help keep us on the air. If you want to be part of that, you can go to spiritmatterstalk.com and all the information will be available. And we ask you, but whether you're listening or at the YouTube channel, please hit subscribe. And remember that we have about 300 shows in our archives, which we plan to always keep free and available to everyone at any time. So our guest today, another great guest, Jason Gardner. He is the executive editor at New World Library, a San Francisco Bay Area publisher, where he has worked for 25 years. He acquires books on spirituality, philosophy, personal growth, psychology, parenting, and nature environment. They publish for some of the great authors in that area, and we'll get into that in the interview today. Jason, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on today, and thank you for the great work you're doing in publishing.
Oh, well, thanks. No, I'm really happy to be with you guys.
And we've had a number of New World Library authors on the show, and we have some booked for the future. And so we're very happy to hear from you, because New World has become a force in contemporary spirituality. Jason, why don't we begin, as we usually do, with you telling us and our listeners something about your own spiritual background and what brought you to wanting to work with the kind of authors you do.
Yeah, well, you know, I would say the spirituality is not really the part that drew me fully to book publishing. I sort of was drawn to book publishing first, but had spiritual curiosity. I was drawn to Buddhism in college, but I'd say that my real sort of passion was around the environment. I did some work as an environmental journalist, but I also worked with a literary agent and as a bookseller. And those are the things that sort of drew me into book publishing. But, you know, I always had a curiosity around these things, and I've done some meditation sort of casually. And I like reading spiritual books, but as opposed to some editors I know in this realm, I don't have, I don't go to a lot of retreats or workshops. And I actually think that I come to this as a reader and someone who is interested in these things. And so, you know, I often think that it's easier for me to approach these books when I'm editing from a beginner's mind of not really knowing things about various paths, and really trying to, learn what I can. And, our goal is always to make these topics as accessible as possible. So that's, sort of that. So that's my background. I was an English major and I have a master's in journalism. I did, journalism. So the editing part of it was always, at the forefront. But then I worked the bookstore I worked at and the literary agent I worked with were very focused on spiritual books. And so I, kind of was drawn in that way.
Jason, I'm curious. I'm not as familiar as Phil even would be in terms of publishing and how that goes. And you have some amazing people that you publish, like Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, Dan Millman, to name a few. Are you the initial contact with those people? And why does one author choose a publishing house over another publisher? What is it that you present to them that would make them want to go with you?
Yeah, so I'm, my position, I'm an acquisitions editor. There are three of us at New World who acquire books, including our publisher, Mark Allen, and Georgia Hughes, our editorial director, and me. So yeah, I'm the person who I get proposals from agents and authors, and so I read proposals, I take them to our acquisitions committee. I end up being sort of the the proponent for the book and the point person for the author and agent throughout the whole editing, the whole publication process. So, whether that's, whether I'm dealing with the marketing aspect of it, I also am pitching the book to our sales and marketing people with our distributor. And so I'm really the advocate for the book and the author. For us, we're an independent publisher. We've been around since 1977. Mark Allen and Shakti Gawain were the founders of the company with the book Creative Visualization. And so, we've been an independent publisher all this time. A lot of publishers that came up around the same time in the Bay Area in the 70s have been, scooped up by the big houses, which are basically starting to become just one big house, which is Penguin Random House. And so we've managed to stay, a vibrant independent publisher. We're distributed by Publishers Group West, which is now part of Ingram, but they're historically one of the biggest and best distributors of independent publishers.
But if I could ask,
if
somebody says, look, I'm open to coming with you, but I could go with Penguin, or I could go with the small. What do you tell them? Yeah,
so that a very frequent situation we're in. I mean, and typically because we are an independent publisher, we don't have the deep corporate pockets to pay the huge advances. And so, what we offer is a much more sort of intimate experience. I mean, because we are independent, each book is sort of more important. The success of each book is more important. The big houses, they pay a big advance. If the book doesn't work right away, they have to move on to the next book out of a necessity. So we try to stay with our books longer, doing in the publicity and marketing. And ultimately, what we're really hoping is that we can form a long partnership with an author. I mean, that's the most fun, is when we can, do multiple books and, develop sort of a sustainable publishing path with an author. So that's that our publisher, Mark Allen, likes to talk about, forming a partnership, and that's what we really try to offer. And so, it is and we've all been, New World Library is a great company to work for, and we've all been here for a long time. Often I work with authors all the time who have been, published by the big houses. They're in the middle of the process. The editor leaves and they end up with another editor. I mean, I almost hear that with almost every single author I work with. Phil, it's probably happened to you.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So, that's that sort of stability and intimate experience is really what we.
In fact, it happened just last week. A publisher in India wanted to look into the rights to American Veda, and it was 10 years ago that it was published, and I had no idea who at Penguin Random House to contact, because everybody that I knew was gone, and Penguin wasn't part of it then, and that's the way it is. But anyway, since you brought up the origin story of New World, and I'd like you, if you could, to say a little bit more about that, because one of the reasons I thought it would be great to have you on is the history of New World parallels sort of contemporary spirituality. So in the 1970s, there were very few publishers publishing the kind of books you do. One of them was Jeremy Tarcher, who was a very close friend of mine and published one of my early books, but that was not till the 80s. And so that you've remained independent and went from, a tiny little operation publishing Shakti Gawain to having a backlist of considerably good books and good authors. It's an interesting story in itself. So tell us a little bit about those origins and where it was when you came along.
Yeah, so it is an interesting path, and Jeremy Tarcher, who definitely was a mentor of Mark's in some ways. He learned a lot from Jeremy, and Phil Wood at 10 Speed Press, and Louise Hay at Hay House. Those are all sort of similar, publishers and figures who came up around the same time. I think a lot of it does go to Mark's sort of vision for wanting this to be an ongoing independent entity, and really taking care of his employees and taking care of his authors. I think what we've been really lucky to have are several big bestsellers that have been huge backlist. That has been a big so it was creative visualization, and that would have sold millions of copies, and then through various permutations. I mean, Mark worked with Shakti for a long time. Shakti went off and formed Nataraj Publishing, which then was folded back into New World Library. But in the mid 90s, that's when co-published with Amber Allen Press was 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra. And that was another huge bestseller. And that's when around the time I came on, I joined New World Library in 1996. Through sometimes we've acquired other publishers, we've formed partnerships with other publishers. H.J. Kramer was the publisher of Way of the Peaceful Warrior. We formed a partnership with them where we published Dan Millman's books and some other Diet for a New America by John Robbins. And now that, as the Kramers have passed away, now H.J. Kramer is part of New World Library as well. So we do, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, some of Dan's other books, Life You Were Born to Live, and actually just coming out with Dan Millman's memoir very soon, is going to the printer on Friday. So I've been Dan's editor for many of those books, the more recent ones. Then another thing that happened, I formed a partnership with the Joseph Campbell Foundation with Bob Walter, the executive director, and this was about over 20 years ago that we started working with them to bring initially to bring some books that had gone out of print back into print, and then we ended up bringing in some new titles that were compilations of Campbell's lectures, and now we've also brought in other books that were published elsewhere, and the Campbell Foundation was able to get the rights back and bring them into the collected works of Joseph Campbell. And so we've done, I don't know, I don't know the full title, maybe 13, 14 books. And that includes The Hero of the Thousand Faces, which has also become another, it's an absolute classic, and it's another bestseller that we have in our backlist. That, I think working with the Campbell Foundation is a good example of the kind of model that we try to have of really having a partnership, where we can have a sustainable path to publish a lot of books together and really, market and promote in partnership with an author, or in the case of the Campbell Foundation. So
can I follow up, Dennis? Two things, Jason. One, you mentioned Deepak's 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Very good.
Now, at that time, Deepak was already very famous,
right,
and had bestsellers.
Right.
So, why would he have gone with a small partnership arrangement like you had, when he could have, his editors at Harmony would have given him a lot of money for that? That's one question. And the author, the New World author who you haven't mentioned yet, is Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, of
so
course.
Tell us
yes.
how that happened. And
right. Yeah. So, okay. Well, first, yes, Eckhart is the the next one that took us to the next level. So why did Deepak go with us? This was, it was really Janet Mills, who is the founder of Amber Allen Press, which began as an imprint of New World Library. And, you know, this is really sort of Mark Allen empowering his employees to go out and do things. And she, you know, she found a cassette that Deepak had put together, and she said, you know, she went to him and said, this could make the beginnings of a book. And so and you know, Deepak being Deepak, he's open to possibilities. And so he agreed to, you know, see what would happen. And that created a book called Creating Affluence. And then that led to 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. So yeah, it was the gumption of Janet Mills that really led to that, and Deepak's openness and willingness to sort of potentially anger his editors at Random House, but it's all
I'm sure his
worked out in the end.
agent at the time didn't like the idea.
Yeah. So Eckhart Tolle, you know, I have to give Mark a lot of credit on this one. Power of Now was originally published by a very small, I mean, it was almost self-published in Canada, and started getting word of mouth. One of our distributors in Canada who distributes into the sort of new age bookstores and spiritual bookstores, Barbara Dempsey, saw that this book was starting to get some word of mouth. She sent a copy to us, and you know, I think I told Phil this story. I read a little bit of it and I thought, wow, this is good. You know, we should jump on this. But as we circulate books within our acquisitions committee, Mark, our publisher, read part of it and picked up the phone immediately and made an offer. And he's never done this before or since, but he knew that this book was special. And I have to admit that I thought it was a little bit too difficult to be a real bestseller. But he was right, I was wrong, and it's an amazing testament to Eckhart's his sort of vision and his writing ability, his ability to sort of convey the ideas that he does in such a clear way that you know, that book, we've sold something like 5 million copies, and we're selling more copies now than we were even a few years ago.
Wow.
You know, it's something that we've during the pandemic, book sales, you know, our backlist, the books that that sell year over year have increased in sales because people really need these ideas right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You've been at this for 25 plus years, and you mentioned you one of the books, Eckhart Tolle, you thought maybe there was something there. What do you look for? What catches you? What you're obviously very good at this and very experienced at it. I might read a book and think, boy, this is great and nobody else would want it, or this is terrible and everybody wants to buy it. I'm really not the one to talk to. My takes are often run different than other people. But what do you look for? What is it? Is it just intuitive, or are there specific things you look for when evaluating whether a book is going to be selling well or not?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I do think there is a certain amount of intuition, and I also think that, you know, no one knows anything in the end. I mean, we certainly have books that we think are going to be fantastic, you know, sellers, and they end up being total flops, and we have books that we have modest expectations for that end up being strong sellers. So, but you know, agents are always asking me, what are you guys looking for right now? And we really don't. You know, we try not to follow trends, or we really look at books individually and authors individually. Now, obviously, you know, the dreaded P word, the platform, is what we are always talking about with authors. Their ability to reach an audience is more important than ever. So, you know, whether it's social media platform or you know, their workshop schedule and you know, their mailing list and the evidence that there's already an audience for a book, that where an author's already reaching an audience, that obviously is very important for our kind of book, because we don't we're not always, we're rarely going to get a review in the New York Times Book Review, even though that doesn't sell books anymore as much as it used to. But, traditional book reviews, that's not our kind of books, don't typically get those. So, reaching their ability to reach an audience is extremely important. A lot of times it's about the idea, because, we have, we're editors, we have outside edit, we have a group of freelancers we've worked with for decades who are really great. And we can get a book into good shape and so it reads well. And so it's really about the idea and the author's voice. I mean, that definitely makes a difference. But, there are books that are really about the author, about the writing quality. And then there are books that are really about the idea and the sort of the teacher's audience. So, yeah.
Jason, in the years you've been at this, what, on a personal level, what are the lessons you've learned about life and spirituality from your authors, from working with them? How has it affected you on a personal level, other than this is how you make your living?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky to have had this career. I mean, it's always incredible to get emails. Authors will often forward emails they get from readers about the influence these books have had on their lives. And we really, our tagline is books that change lives. We really have seen that, where we've, people who are having hard times, people who, these books are often able to shift people's perspectives. So yeah, I'm very, I feel very grateful to have a job that does matter in that way. Not all books are that way. Sometimes we publish books that we think are going to sell, but we always try to have, we have to believe in our books. And, I mean, in terms of how it's affected me personally, I think, I've been exposed to a lot of different ideas. Some I think are more, they connect with me more personally than others. Like I said, if the books that I love aren't always big sellers, there are lots of wonderful books that I've published that where the writing's wonderful and I wish they had reached a bigger audience. But I think in terms of giving me, learning about meditation, sort of kind of constantly refocusing my attention back to things that matter. I think that's what our books can do ultimately, is like, because we're always in the process of forgetting and getting caught up in our, daily craziness. And so, just as reading spiritual books, people who love to read spiritual books, I get the same pleasure and enjoyment and gratification from the books that, from working on them. So,
yeah, along those lines, you had mentioned earlier, I believe that you were specifically interested in environmental issues, as are many of us these days, much more so than ever before, for good reason.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that more of the books that would be categorized as spiritual that you encounter incorporate issues in regard to the environment and the relationship of spirituality to being responsible toward our environment?
Yes, I would say, books on the environment have always been a very difficult sell. I mean, from the beginning, I mean, there are lots of books that I would have liked to acquire that just is too difficult to sort of reach an audience. But that has changed. I mean, people are much more, I'd say, aware of and open to books on the environment than they were. It's still a challenge, because especially if you're talking about something that's, people do not want to buy books for the most part that are downers, so that is, I mean, obviously there are books that have done really well on climate change that are extreme downers, but they're very publicity driven. And, so I would say, I mean, those are the kind of books that I love the most, are where there's a personal aspect where people can really sort of embrace something personally, that they can grow personally from the book, but there's also an aspect of social change. And bringing those two things together have always been sort of a personal goal of mine. I feel like it's a great challenge getting books on social change and environmental change that actually sell. 20 years ago, I went to a conference that one of my dear late authors, Wayne Teasdale, who I know you guys have talked about, he organized. It was the synthesis dialogues with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in India, and brought together a lot of people. And it was sort of, I realized it from the beginning, it was sort of these two camps. There were sort of the spirituality, personal growth people, and then there was the social change people, and they were not talking to each other really. It was this, right. And I thought, okay, bringing these two groups of people together and really trying to meld these visions, I think is what it's all about. And sometimes, you have to kind of sneak the social change into the book with the promise of the personal change at the forefront. So
if I may comment, that what you observed in that regard is something I and many other observers of the spiritual scene have been advocating for a long time. And one of our popular guests on the show, Marianne Williamson, was in the forefront of trying to bring those worlds together. And that's a trend I've seen develop over the years. As sitting where you are in publishing, where you either publish or hear from a lot of leaders in the world of contemporary spirituality, what other trends have you observed over the 25 years? And I'm going to squeeze in another related question, which is, when people talk about publishing houses like New World or Sounds True or some of the other small presses, they call them New Age publishers. How do you feel about that term?
Well, that's interesting. So when I first started working with New World, I think we probably were much more of a New Age publisher. Certainly a lot of our early titles were what you would consider New Age books. Now I think we have such a varied list, and we have everybody from Mother Teresa to people like Wayne, and so we've covered the wide gamut of spirituality and other topics as well, under the rubric of books that are really going to help people. There are aspects of New Age thought that I obviously really embrace, and there are aspects that I don't embrace, personally. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think as a Gen Xer, it's not a term that I think my generation appeals to my generation for the most part. It's much more of a baby boomer term, and so I think it's just sort of gone out of favor, and now it's just that those ideas have been incorporated into the mainstream, and they've been incorporated into spirituality in general.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of trends, I think some things come and go, but I mean, the same some of the New Age books that were selling back in the 80s are still selling now, and there's I think a lot of these things are sort of perennial. I hope that we are seeing that engagement with social change. I have a book coming out actually today called Sit Down to Rise Up by Shelley Tegelski, who's someone who's really, she has affected huge social change, and from the perspective of a mindfulness teacher. And the book is really about how sort of personal practice, self-care, mindfulness can have this ripple effect that goes out and actually does change things in the wider society. And I think that inevitably has to be the sort of trend that we take as publisher and as a society, because obviously things do need to change. So I think books that address that are increasingly popular, and I hope they will be.
I had one last question, Jason, and actually you've answered it in part in the answer you just gave, but have you over the years picked up on early stages of trends in terms of where people's interests are going? Maybe there's some changes, maybe the environment becomes more important, economics become more important, politics become more important, even in relation to a publishing house that focuses on spirituality, and that it goes in that direction. Are you picking up on any trends now? I mean, there's great division in the country, and I'm wondering if any of the books that are coming out are addressing that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I really, I mean, in terms of like, am I picking up on trends? We are seeing a huge amount of interest in the kind of books that we publish. And I mean, that there are periods in time, my wife works for New Harbinger Publications, which is another Bay Area published from the 70s they focus on self-help and psychology books. And, both of our companies are doing really well right now because people are having a hard time, and, it's like when things are hard, our books sell. And so, clearly I think people are having a hard time, and, I think it's gratifying to be able to work in work for a publisher, work in an industry where we can offer things that will help people. In terms of what this means for our divided country, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, it's clear that we're sort of speaking to one side of the audience, one side of this divide, and not,
right.
I would love to somehow enlarge that, so to reach other people from different perspectives. But I think we suffer from the polarization that our country suffers from.
Nobody's found that formula yet.
No.
I have one other question for you, Jason. You mentioned Wayne Teasdale a couple of times. I'm not sure how many of our viewers and listeners know who Wayne was. He was not only a dear soul, I think he was an important figure in contemporary spirituality who passed much too early. He was probably poised to be an important leader at that time, and people are trying to carry on his work. Can you tell us something about Wayne and the work of his that you published?
Yeah, so I did a book called The Mystic Heart initially with him in 1999. Wayne was a figure in the sort of ecumenical world religions realm, and his personal path was he had studied with Bede Griffiths in India, and bringing sort of his personal path was the way of the Christian sannyasi, so bringing Hinduism and Christianity together, and that sort of effort to create sort of a universal spirituality, or to find the commonalities between the world's religions. I ended up doing several books with Wayne before he passed away, and we did some other books that sort of in that realm, and I think was really something that his vision of bringing people together. He used to do these dialogues with the Dalai Lama's brother, Tenzin Chogyal, and that were really hilarious, rollicking, fun. Humor was a huge part of Wayne's, his daily practice and self. And so he was, I mean, he did a reading at my wedding. I got to be close friends with him fairly quickly, because he was that kind of person who was
right.
so open and wonderful. So
And he coined the term interspirituality, which I hope will catch on more and more. And
Yeah.
this is the mystic
There
heart.
it is.
Hold it
Yes.
back.
See,
Which
you can
still-
see
still-
I had it tabbed a lot for my own research.
Great cover.
Yeah, that's great.
And I was honored when he endorsed one of my books, and so I'm glad we could pay a little tribute to him and the mystic heart.
Yes, and I want to say, Phil, that I really, I was really happy the way you talked about him in your book, American Beta, and Russell Paul, who's one of his good friends.
Right, I mentioned him, and and of course Joseph Campbell, which
Right.
I remember noting that the collection that you were publishing, the name of the collection was Thou Art That, or That Thou Art, or whichever.
Yeah, Thou Art That was the first one. Yes,
And
exactly.
which, for the listeners, is the famous maxim or Mahavakya of the Upanishads that in Sanskrit is Tattvam Asi, and that it became the name of Joseph Campbell's collected works was very meaningful.
Yes, it was the first, and it was the first book of the collected works, and it's actually a book that's mostly about Judeo-Christian traditions, but drawing on Campbell's great knowledge of the world's traditions, and drawing on the showing the commonalities between the traditions.
That's great, and I think that's one of the functions that New World and other publishers of spiritual books are doing, is bringing out this sort of perennial commonality.
As is Spirit Matters Talk. That's what we
And
do.
Spirit Matters.
Absolutely, you guys are doing a great job. Amazing,
you,
all the
Dave.
people you've had on this.
Thanks for being with us.
Great. Really enjoyed it. I learned a
Thanks.
lot. I don't know much about the publishing end, so it's
Yeah,
great to meet.
it's a lot of fun. Well, it's great talking with you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay, take good care and keep up the good work, and we'll be having more of New World authors on in the coming months.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Keep sending us press releases
Oh, we will. We will.
and books. Okay, take care.
Okay. Phil, that was Jason Gardner. It was excellent for me because I am much less familiar than you are with the publishing end of things, of books, and especially in this realm of contemporary spirituality. He's been at it for 25 years, and I think they serve a wonderful, they fill a gap, because not everybody wants to go with an enormous publisher. It was interesting, the story he told about Deepak, and how maybe part of the reason Deepak did that was to keep his big publisher on their toes.
Well, no, it also, the idea came from an editor, and so he probably, knowing the publishing world as I do, he may have had an agreement. He was being published by Harmony, which was division of Random House. And so it's possible he had an obligation to show, to publish his next book with them, but they allowed him to go, publish this little book with an unknown publisher that ended up selling millions of copies. But, there are advantages and disadvantages to the big publishing houses, but it's changed a lot. My early books, most of my books have been with major publishers, but a lot of the publishing houses I published with are now owned by one big company. And, I published a few books with Jeremy Tarcher when he was an small independent California publisher like New World was. And then he was acquired by companies that are now Penguin Random House, and things change. But with respect to spirituality, back in the 70s, this kind of conventional spirituality that people called New Age back then, there were some publishers who took a risk or two. But for the most part, it took companies like Jeremy Tarcher and New World and a few other small companies to demonstrate there was
Phil, what was the first book to be a breakthrough book in that category, where they started taking it seriously?
One that I can think of it, and it put Jeremy's little publishing house on the map, was The Aquarian Conspiracy.
What year was that?
Marilyn Ferguson, probably late 70s.
But like, did Be Here Now, was that a big seller back then?
Yes, because of who Ram Dass was, and that was an independent house. You know, that was I forget what it was even called, but you know, and that was 60. You know, that was early 70s. But it was because Ram Dass was a famous figure, and he decided, you know, for whatever reason, he was going to publish it with this. I think the publishing house was created just to publish Be Here Now. So books like that, you're right, and several other breakthroughs demonstrated that there was a market for this. And then Bantam, huge, you know, Bantam Publishing created an imprint called New Age Press, New Age something or other, New Age Books, and they, in a sense, co-opted a lot of, you know, authors that would have gone with smaller publishers because they had
obviously Jason and folks from his generation, which would be the next generation after ours, don't, especially in publishing, don't like the term New Age, because first of all, there's nothing new.
I always hated it.
Yeah, and what was it? I always find, I'd like to find out its origins, because I always felt like it was a put down. You know, it was okay.
It was used that way.
Sort of, I've even used it in that way. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
New Age. You
New
know,
Age.
mumbo jumbo. But to categorize everything in that way was never right, and so they are moving away from that.
I think it began as, you know, a self-description by people involved in that world, and there were a lot of, you know, back in the late 70s and into the 80s, people like Deepak and Wayne Dyer and you know, others had huge, they were very popular, had big selling books. And then a lot of sort of fringy topics crept in, channeling and you know, crystals and all this other stuff. And that came to be associated with,
what was it?
Was it a new age of spirituality? It became an object of satire.
Right. A question for you, Phil, related to publishing in this realm. Was it back in the day? Was it the Whole Earth catalog?
Yeah, remember that?
They do any publishing of books? They were big. Everybody had that Whole Earth. You could order stuff. It was before the internet, and it had everything that would appeal to people that were more progressive, or even you might have categorized as hippies back then. And but I'm wondering, did they publish any books?
I don't remember, but you know that even then, even like early 70s, one could self-publish. You could create a little publishing house. There were a lot of little ones like 10 Speed Press, I remember, and others. So it was possible. Now, of course, you know, anybody can publish a book. But even then, small publishers sometimes just took a risk, raised some money, and they had a breakthrough. That's how New World started on the website. If you look at New World's history, you know, it started as, you know, a few bucks out of pocket. And I think it said something like their total revenues the first year was $800.
Wow.
And, you know,
that was a good year.
Then you might have a breakthrough, like they had Shakti Gawain's creative visualization.
While we are on the subject, are you working on a book, or do you have anything coming out soon? Author Phil?
I'm working on a number of nonfiction things at the same time, nursing them into shape. But I've been working on my long-awaited novel, long
Can
awaited.
you tell us anything about it?
Long awaited, meaning I've been waiting more than 20 years to work on it
Well, I'll start
seriously,
waiting
and,
for it now.
and a few
so-
members of my family have been long awaiting my doing it. It's a sequel to the novel that I published in the early 90s with Ballantine that 5 or 6 people have read, and and it's deeply personal, and it's set in 1969, and it has
Do you have a
I'm
timeline
okay
on it?
mentioning it here only because it's a, you know, it's a work of fiction, but it's deeply personal, and it's has a strong spiritual current that runs through it.
We look forward to it, and it'll certainly be a topic on the show. And
Will
to
you have
remind
me on as a
everybody-
guest when it comes out?
we could probably work that out.
Okay.
It's self-exploration will be part of it, because you'll be one of the interviewers as well as an interviewee. So we are now a YouTube channel. So if you're listening to us on a podcast, great. Please subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. If you're listening to us on the YouTube channel, please subscribe. And doesn't cost anything. And if you want to find us on the YouTube channel, just go to YouTube and under search, put in 3 words, Spirit Matters Talk. Also want to thank everybody who has contributed to help keep us on the air. And if anybody would like to do that on a regular basis, on a one-time basis, we would greatly appreciate it. We're not a nonprofit, so it's not a donation, but it keeps us afloat. And our goal is to always be available, free and available to everyone. We have about close to 300 shows in the archives now. We've had some fantastic guests, and we have some great guests coming up. So Phil, till next time.
All right. Next time. Bye.